Constitutional law expert joins us from Cape Town. Phephelaphi, if you're with us, this brings a whole lot of years of prosecuting wrangling to an end. Your reaction to today's announcement?
Well, it's certainly an important affirmation for the rule of law, but in a sense, we're back to where we were back in 2009 when the charges were first announced and when the decision was first taken. So in a sense, it's a bit of an anticlimax in the sense that we've had 10 years of intense legal battles, we've had 10 years of intense speculation, but instead, today's decision takes us back to where we should have been, and this was back in 2009.
Well, like you say, there was a technical argument way back when. Are all those technical things going to come up in court again? Are we going to hear about the spy tapes again and all this new evidence that Zuma's team has given to the NPA about how bad the Prosecuting Authority is?
Well, I think we could anticipate those same arguments being brought back to the court, bearing in mind what Shaun Abrahams had said about the manner of the representations that former President Jacob Zuma's legal team had made. I think there had been some kind of allusions to the motives for the actual prosecution itself. But on the other hand, we also need to consider how the Supreme Court of Appeal dealt with that particular argument. The Supreme Court of Appeal basically said that it doesn't matter even if a prosecutorial decision is taken for improper reasons or if it's taken for an improper motive, because ultimately what matters is the evidence that's going to be adduced before the court. So I think that's pretty much where we are going to be headed, but we also need to bear in mind that the Supreme Court of Appeal has already dealt with this particular question.
And the evidence must be strong because a court has already found that Zuma was bribed.
Absolutely, and if we also consider the fact that Shabir Sheikh has already been found guilty of some of those charges and the fact that he was already convicted, I think he had a minimum sentence conviction of 15 years, but of course we all know the allegations regarding the medical parole. So of course, taking all of those factors into account, it would suggest that there's a very strong case going forward.
What sort of timelines are you expecting?
Well, I would say if we're not going to anticipate an appeal to this, to Shaun Abrahams' announcement this afternoon that the KwaZulu-Natal High Court is going to get started with the prosecutorial process, and I think if a verdict is then given on on this particular case, I think there's a very high likelihood of an appeal being given against that particular conviction. So I think we're looking at perhaps 3 to 4 more years before this matter is finally settled.
And then considering Jacob Zuma's age, what is the real likelihood of him doing jail time?
Well, of course, I think that could be a mitigating factor, depending, of course, on how the judgment goes. In the sense that if he is convicted on perhaps a count of corruption, which comes with a minimum sentence of 15 years, we also need to consider that he is a man of advanced age. I think he's 76 years old. So, of course, his age might count as a mitigating factor in that regard.
Phephelaphi, this in some sense has been a test of the justice system, of our constitutional democracy, and that test will no doubt continue as it goes to trial. But how do you think we're looking right now?
Well, I think we will need to consider the fact that, and I think this is already a line that the governing party has already taken, the fact that an individual is innocent until they are proven guilty. And of course, it's also important for the courts to also afford former President Zuma his day in court. I think that's been very much his rallying call, the fact that he wants to be given his day in court. But of course, we also need to consider very important constitutional values of equality, the fact that he deserves, you know, the equal protection and equal benefit of the law. But of course, I think this judgment or today's announcement, which was really off of the back of the Supreme Court of Appeals decision. So in a sense, Shaun Abrahams was really between a rock and a hard place, because the Supreme Court of Appeal made it quite clear that he really only had one direction to take in terms of making today's announcement. So I think in that sense, the courts have very much come to the table, and I think the developments are an important affirmation of South Africa's rule of law, which of course has been tested. But I think going forward, we can look forward to a measure of confidence in the South African courts.
And do you really believe that Jacob Zuma wants his day in court? He spent a lot of time in court trying to stop that day from coming.
Well, if we also consider the personal cost order that he got last year, you know, in the sense that it seemed to imply that the South African judiciary seemed to be exasperated, and it seemed to have really reached the end of its tether in the sort of seemingly lack of legal basis, in terms of which, you know, his legal team tended to approach a lot of his cases. So I think in that sense, it would imply that he was very much using the courts as a way of buying time. And I think there have been quite a few reports which have referred to this as, you know, the Stalingrad battle approach. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily a genuine desire to see his day in court, or if it's really being used as a ruse to simply buy time.
Yeah, that was my point. Finally, just your thoughts on Shaun Abrahams being the messenger. Is this actually a strong thing because he was seen as pro-Zuma in the past, or bad because he's now seen to be in a different camp? Or what about the man, Shaun Abrahams, being the one making this announcement?
Well, I think the unfortunate result of this particular announcement is that I think this announcement comes at a time when there have been certain changes in the political sphere, namely the sense that there's been changes within the governing party, as well as changes within the national president of the country. So it would appear, or it would suggest at the very least, that the National Prosecuting Authority is taking certain decisions which are aligned with the political sphere, which of course brings its own independence into question. So I think that's really an unfortunate assessment that could be drawn out of the recent developments.
All right, thank you so much for your time from Cape Town. Constitutional expert Phephelaphi Dube. We'll bring you lots more analysis tonight. We're going to speak to the former ANC politician Andrew Feinstein, who resigned over the arms deal, over the lack of seriousness that he perceived from the ruling party. We'll get his thoughts. We'll be speaking to Karen Morn from the Financial Mail, and many more later in the show. For now, we take a short break.